Okay, so I've started to get some test corrections turned in, and a few of them have had some issues. So let me reiterate the basics. Create a virtual document. Please type up all your answers there. If you're taking pictures of things, it really should just be structures. You can type things out a lot clearer to get a lot more points than if you try and write them out and then just take pictures of that. But one way or the other, do submit a single document with all of your work and corrections in there. And please make sure that you're writing out the question, the correct answer, and justifying it. I mentioned that some of these questions are going to need more than just a justification in words, that they might need structures. So I went ahead, kind of want to show you real quick a little behind how I grade these test corrections. And the most important thing to you guys is probably going to be to looking at each of the questions that you might need to correct. I have them numbered down the left-hand side, and then what I require in order to get those points back. And I'll talk about the points and breakdown in the second half, but this is the most important thing, is that most of them, at least multiple choice questions, just need you to write out the question, the answer, and to justify it. So that's what that QAJ means. But then some of them are questions based on the structure. And if you watched my last video, you saw that oxygen is the substance, the option there in question number 1 that has a double bond in it. And so in order to justify that answer, I need to actually see the structure of that oxygen molecule in order to give you those points back. You can't just say that oxygen is the answer because it has a double bond. Well, yes, I assume it does because that was what the question was asking, which molecule has a double bond. To prove it, you've got to draw it out for me. So that's what I'm looking for here. And so the rest of these are kind of similar. Number 2 just needs question, answer, justify. If I remember correctly, that's just about the properties of a substance. Question 3 is a structure-based question, although I gave you the structure, so just draw out my structure and then point to the things. And I just realized that I had misspelled structure there because this is just an outline of what I'm looking for. And then you can see here, I also need to see structures, maybe a generic structure on 7. That was the one where I said that you're like this general, like some mysterious thing, molecule has this many bonds and lone pairs. What is its structure? So you can use just kind of like what I did with the X's and Y's, not real elements, but just show me kind of generally what that molecule would look like and use that to defend and justify your answer. 9, I'm going to need a structure, 10, and then 15 as well. After that, I did specify that in questions 16 through 29, I need those correct names and formulas, but I also need you to include the type of compound in your justification. So ionic or covalent there, because they have completely different naming structures. So start from there. Say, this is ionic, so it didn't need prefixes, and I did need a Roman numeral, or it didn't, or this is how we find our formula. If it's ionic, then you find these and this, and then you do these steps. So make sure you start, or at least include somewhere in there, that type of compound, or else you're not going to be able to get full credit back. And then, of course, those last few questions are structure questions, or questions about analyzing those structures that you drew out and attached in number 38. So make sure that you include that structure there. Even if you didn't miss the points for it down here, I need to see that structure correctly drawn and then analyzed here. And don't forget to justify these things. It's not just about finding the right answer. I need, with things like these geometries, remember how we talked through it in class. We said, okay, this is a molecule, and if I just have like X, Y, 3 here, maybe. The way we reasoned through this in class in our electron geometry, we started from how many things we can see. And in our electron geometry, we wrote in our notes the types of things we could see, whether that was bonds, lone pairs, or both. And then after we knew how many things we could see, like if we could see 3 things, we said that name was like a triangle name, one of those trigonal options. We could see 4 things, and that was that tetra shape. If we saw 2 things, just like in geometry, that tended to be some kind of linear shape. Now, there were things that could change that. Remember that lone pairs sometimes change those geometries, and that we can see different things in our electron and our molecular geometry. So in our electron geometry, we can see bonds, lone pairs, or both. In molecular geometry, we see bonds, lone pairs, or both. But they're going to be different answers. So in each of these, start from explaining what you can see. I can see these 3 things, so it's going to be trigonal this. I can see only see these 2 things in its molecular geometry, so this is going to be its name. So start from that. Same with your polarity. It's something about your structure. Say, because it has this in its structure, it is polar. Or because it doesn't have this in its structure, it is nonpolar. So it has to come back to that structure. IMF, you don't necessarily need the structure there, because the IMF mostly depends on the polarity, but because polarity depends on structure, you still kind of do. So, long story short, make sure you got the structures there at the end of the test for each of those questions. And don't forget about our question 38, that ionic structure. There were 7 total structures you were supposed to draw and attach pictures of, and a lot of people forgot or did that ionic structure completely wrong. So go back and look on your test between questions 22 and 23 for the instructions to draw a specific ionic structure, and then also go and look in my corrections instructions. I have a link to the podcast that shows you how to do that in there. So use that to help you out. Now, the rest of this, so we've mostly been focusing on these first 2 columns, what questions you've got and what I am requiring you to do to get those points back. Now, the rest of this is really kind of stuff you probably don't need to know or care about, but for those of you who aren't sure how I can tell you that you need to do more, or I'm giving you partial credit, this is kind of where that comes from and why. Depending on how much stuff I asked you to do for the corrections, I assigned each of those questions a point value. Now, it doesn't necessarily match the point value on the test, because I figured those points were allocated based on how much stuff was in there and how hard those questions were, and that's going to be what makes those questions harder or easier to correct. But I'm just worried about kind of the quality of those corrections and whether you got that correct. So most simple, just question, answer, justify are just 2 points apiece. If I needed to have an extra structure or type included in there, then that was an extra thing, an extra part that I was looking for in your answer to have correct. So I assigned every question that simple point value. And when I go through and I grade your corrections, I fill in how many points you earned for that question. And then this last column, diff, is to show me the difference. So right now, this is my template. So there's no points awarded. So all of those have something in that diff column. So let me show you some just example pretend students here to help you see how this might work. So when I'm going through and grading it, if you didn't need to correct that question, I actually delete the points from that total parts column, because I don't expect you to have done that and earn those points. And then the parts completed would also be blank, so that could be a 0. If you needed to correct that question, I leave the total parts there. That's what I expect from you. And I fill in how many points I've awarded you based on what I needed you to do there. And so here you see this diff column is still 0 because you needed to correct it, but you did it perfectly, at least as well as I needed from you. There's also a possibility that you needed to correct it, so I left that column there, the same standard values as from my template. But this time, maybe they just got the answer correct, but they didn't include the structure or explain why. So maybe they just got 1 out of those 3 points. So they didn't get all of their points here. And I'm going to do that for each of the questions going down. And you can see anything that has pink and kind of red writing by it, there were issues with those questions. And when we get to the bottom, Because I've taken out each of the questions that you didn't need to correct, now my total just shows me the total number of parts or things that you should have done in order to earn back credit for your correction specifically. And then this is how many points you actually, or how many parts you actually completed correctly. This is the difference between it. And then I actually started calculating, okay, this is the completion rate. This just takes how much you got right divided by how much you should have done. Then I look at your test and just input how many points you needed to pass. And then the points earned is going to be this completion percentage plus 20%. Then divided by 100. So like I'm taking this percentage rating, giving you a little bit of kind of flexibility in it. So adding 20%. So this person, this imaginary student, is technically earning back 63% of their points here, because I took that percentage plus 20 times the number of points that they needed. And the reason I'm doing that is because I know that you may not do everything perfect, but I expect you to at least get basically an 80% on your corrections to get back full credit on your test. And I feel like that's pretty generous, is giving you that 20% kind of bump there. Not everything's going to be perfect, but you can still get full credit back even if you do at least 80% of it right and complete. So you'll notice here on this person, they did not get to that 80%. They're only at 40%, which means that if they were earning any points back, it would only be about 10 or 11 points, not the 18 they need. But you'll notice that this is highlighted red, because I am not going to award you any points unless you make at least a 50% on your corrections. I am not going to just give you 1 or 2 points if you correct 1 or 2 problems. I need to see you put some decent effort into your corrections if I'm going to give you any points. So I have this set up to format so that if this is that same kind of person, but a couple more things are right, they got a couple more points in a couple of places, this is that imaginary student. So as soon as you get above a 50% completion rate, this turns yellow, which means I might actually consider adding this many points to this person's test, but I'll probably give them some feedback about these questions that they did miss and see if they want to try and correct or complete their corrections in order to get full credit back. And then once we do that, so the top part looks good, but notice there's still a few issues down here. Once you get to that 80% completion or correctness rating, then notice this is giving you back that full 18 points there. So this is just a little peek behind the scenes here, showing you don't have to be perfect. You can still have some mistakes on a few questions in here, even some that you earn 0 credit back from. As long as that's not happening a whole lot, you're fine. And I might not put in these partial points earned until the end of our test correction process, just to give you a chance to earn more than that, but I will give you some points back as long as your corrections look pretty good and you've made some effort on them. But unfortunately, this person is not going to be earning any points back at all because their completion rate, their correctness, they got a lot of issues in here, and some pretty big issues, not just losing 1 or 2 points around in a couple places. So until we get to that 50% completion points, I'll give this person this feedback, tell them all these questions that they got wrong or missed or skipped, and hopefully help them get a little bit better answers filled in, and maybe even just get them to this point, and then hopefully get them to at least this point. So hopefully this was helpful to you. Let me know if you have any questions, but in general, I'll just give me your work, give me your answers, and I'll be giving you feedback as to what you need to do to make it a little bit better.